The bullet tore through her thigh with a wet, muffled crack, a searing agony that stole the breath from her lungs. "Don't move! Stay down!" Officer Grant Whitaker shouted, his face twisted with triumphant fury, the barrel of his Glock still smoking. Special Agent Celeste Monroe collapsed against the glossy black paint of her brand-new Mercedes. The rich scent of leather and perfume suddenly mixed with the metallic tang of her own blood. He took in the crimson silk of her blouse, the full curve of her body, the luxury car, and his mind had already condemned her. "Another one who thinks she owns the place," he muttered, kicking the wallet away from her trembling hand. He had no idea that he had not merely shot a civilian. He had declared war on the entire federal justice system. How badly do you think this ends for him? Where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments. Hit like and subscribe. You will not want to miss a single second of this story. Morning sunlight poured warm and golden across the carefully tended lawns of Crestwood Hills, the kind of perfect quiet day that made people pay $500,000 for their first house. For Officer Grant Whitaker, that same golden light only sharpened his resentment. He had spent years patrolling these streets, watching the houses grow larger, the cars more expensive, and the residents more arrogant. They sped. They ignored him completely. They acted as though the rules applied to everyone else. The newcomers were the worst, the ones who, in his eyes, clearly did not belong. So, when the black Mercedes-Benz S-Class glided past him, a little above the speed limit, the driver, half hidden behind tinted glass, his predatory instinct flared. He hit the lights. Sudden flashes of red and blue sliced through the calm green of the neighborhood. The car signaled at once and eased to a smooth, almost leisurely stop. Too smooth, too calm. His hand already rested on the grip of his service weapon. When he stepped out of the patrol car, the driver's window slid down, and Whitaker's prejudice hardened into absolute certainty. The woman behind the wheel was stunning, not merely attractive, but striking. She was a black woman, perhaps in her mid-30s, with high cheekbones and intelligent almond-shaped eyes. Her hair was gathered in elegant, intricate braids, and she wore a deep wine-colored silk blouse so fine it seemed to catch the light. An expensive, subtle perfume drifted from the car. Then he noticed the firm, prominent curve of her chest beneath the silk. In Whitaker's twisted mind, the combination could mean only one thing: trouble. A drug dealer's girlfriend. A high-end escort. Some rapper's newly rich side piece. Someone who had no business in his neighborhood, driving a car worth more than his house. "License and registration," he barked, every trace of courtesy gone. He did not bend to her level. He loomed over her, forcing her to look up. Her expression stayed calm, though a fleeting flicker of irritation crossed her face. "Good morning, officer. Is there a problem?" Her voice was as smooth as her driving. Low, steady, clear. It unsettled him. "You were doing a little over the limit. License and paperwork. Now." She sighed almost imperceptibly. "Of course." She reached into the glove box with slow, deliberate movements, handed over the registration, then turned slightly in her seat. "As for my license, it's in my wallet, inside my bag on the passenger seat." She pointed. "May I get it?" The politeness felt like mockery to him. She was playing games. "Get it," he snapped. She turned. The silk of her blouse tightened across her chest. Whitaker felt a sharp spike of anger and something uglier he refused to name. He watched her hand disappear into a designer leather bag. His grip tightened on the Glock. Every so-called instinct, really just years of rooted prejudice, screamed at him. The luxury car, the attitude, the neighborhood where she did not belong. It was a script he had already written in his head. She was not looking for a wallet. Her hand came out holding a small, dark leather object. A wallet. But his mind did not see a wallet. It saw a dark rectangular shape and screamed, "Gun!" He watched her begin to turn toward him, and his brain, already convinced of her guilt, filled in a phantom threat. He saw an aggressor, a danger that had to be neutralized. "Gun!" he roared, the single word that justified what he was about to do. He drew his weapon in one precise, almost mechanical motion. He did not wait. He did not ask. He never saw her eyes fly wide with pure shock. He only saw the threat his prejudice had invented. He fired once. The shot cracked like thunder on the quiet, sunlit street. Birds scattered from the oak trees. Celeste Munro felt the impact before she heard the blast. A brutal tearing through her left thigh, a wave of heat so intense it felt cold. Her leg gave way instantly. A strangled cry escaped her as she crumpled against the side of the car. The beautiful silk of her blouse became a canvas for the blood now spreading across her cream-colored trousers. "Don't move! Don't you move!" Whitaker shouted, his voice high and shaking with adrenaline and fear. Not fear of her, but fear of the paperwork he had just created. She stared up at him, trying to grasp the impossible reality. The pain was vivid, a fire devouring her leg. Through the haze, she saw his face. It was not the face of a man who had just made a tragic mistake. It was the face of a man who had just confirmed his own view of the world. He looked at her bleeding on the asphalt beside her luxury car, and in his eyes there was not a flicker of regret, only contempt, only satisfaction. He kicked the wallet that had fallen from her hand. It slid across the pavement and flipped open. Inside, beside her driver's license, a gold badge caught the perfect morning sun, the shield of the FBI. But Officer Whitaker never saw it. He was too busy staring at her, watching the blood, the proof that he had been right all along. She was exactly the kind of problem he had expected. Officer Julian Vargas arrived moments later, tires screeching as he stopped behind Whitaker's patrol car. The scene sent a chill through his stomach. Whitaker stood over a woman lying on the ground, weapon still drawn. She was black, elegantly dressed, bleeding from the leg onto the pristine asphalt. The smell of gunpowder hung in the air, a nauseating scent that did not belong in this quiet Eden. "Grant, what the hell happened?" Vargas shouted, drawing his own weapon and taking a tactical stance, eyes searching for a threat that was not there. "She went for a gun," Whitaker growled, voice tight, eyes locked. It was the first thread of the lie, skin, with the conviction of a fanatic. "I stopped her for speeding. She got mouthy, told me to get her license. She reached into the bag and started pulling a weapon on me. I had no choice." Vargas looked at the woman. Her face was pale with shock, teeth clenched against immense pain. Her hands were empty, held slightly away from her body to show she was unarmed. A few feet away on the ground lay a woman's wallet, an elegant one. There was no gun. "A gun?" Vargas asked, incredulous. "Where is it?" He began to lower his weapon. "Keep it up," Whitaker snapped, utterly certain of himself. "She could have thrown it under the car. We clear the scene first, then we look for the weapon." In that moment, Vargas knew. Any officer who had ever worked with someone like Grant Whitaker knew. There had never been a gun. He felt it in his gut. He saw the open bag still on the passenger seat. He saw the wallet on the ground. He saw the single, perfect bullet hole in her thigh. And he saw Whitaker already raising the walls of a fortress of lies to protect himself. Vargas had to decide right there on that sunny street. He could challenge the lie, or he could help build the wall. For an officer like him, a man who only wanted to finish his career without trouble, there was really no choice. "All right," he said, the word tasting like ash. He kept his weapon trained on the wounded woman. Scene's not secure yet. Whitaker knelt beside Celeste, not to help her, but to restrain her. "You move a finger, and I'll put another one in you," he snarled, locking the handcuffs on her wrists. The sharp bite of the metal was one more humiliation. "You shot me," Celeste gasped, voice broken. "I was reaching for my identification, my credentials." "Shut up," Whitaker said, tightening the cuffs. He patted her down roughly, pausing for a moment at the curve of her hip. A final act of dominance. She carried no weapon. It must be under the car. He keyed the radio, every word crisp and professional, and performance for the recording that was running. Shots fired, officer involved. Suspect is a black female, approximately 30s, attempted to pull a weapon during a traffic stop. Suspect is injured and in custody, scene is secure. He deliberately left out that he had found no weapon. While they waited for the ambulance and the supervisor, Whitaker began orchestrating the scene. With his foot, he pushed the wallet farther under the car. "Let's say it was a dark metallic object," he told Vargas quietly, as if they were partners in crime. "Sun was in my eyes. It flashed." She made a sudden furtive movement. Use those words. Furtive movement. They love that one. Vargas nodded, face rigid. He was now the bricklayer, and Whitaker the architect. "She was resistant from the start," Whitaker continued, pacing as the story grew more elaborate with every telling. "She was cursing me out. I felt my life was in danger. Her hand was going for her waistband when she pulled the bag. Classic training scenario. I was describing an entirely different person, an entirely different reality." Celeste lay on the ground, listening as the fiction was woven around her. The pain in her leg roared like a furnace, but the cold fury growing in her chest was stronger still. She watched these two men sworn to uphold the law conspire to cover up an act of brutal, unjustified violence. She heard them reduce her career, her life, her identity, to a stereotype, an aggressive black woman who had it coming. When Sergeant Roland Voss arrived, a heavy-set veteran with a tired face, Whitaker had already polished his account to perfection. He delivered it with the practiced calm of a man who had been through this before. He was the hero of his own story, a brave officer who had faced death and survived. "She was reaching for me," Whitaker told the sergeant, eyes wide with feigned sincerity. "I saw the flash. I swear to God I thought she was going to kill me." Sergeant Voss looked at Whitaker, then at Vargas, who gave a brief nod. Then he looked down at Celeste as the paramedics lifted her onto a stretcher. He saw the luxury car, the silk blouse, the blood. He saw what he had been trained to see, what the system had conditioned him to see, not a victim, but a problem. Another messy stack of paperwork that endangered one of his men. "You did what you had to do, Whitaker," the sergeant said, clapping him on the shoulder. "We'll get internal affairs down here to take your statement. We've got your back." In that moment, Celeste understood. The lie was no longer Whitaker's alone. It belonged to all of them. It was a shield, a blue wall rising brick by brick, and she was outside it, bleeding. But as they loaded her into the ambulance, she was already processing the information. They thought they were building a fortress. They had no idea they were digging their own grave. The emergency room was a blur of sterile white walls, beeping machines, and cold, urgent voices. A kind-eyed doctor explained that the bullet had passed cleanly through the quadriceps, grazing the femur and the femoral artery by less than an inch. "You're very lucky," he told her. Celeste did not feel lucky. She felt violated. A pure, cold rage moved through her. While they cleaned and sutured the wound, every touch reminded her of Whitaker's hands on her, of his voice spitting lies. They gave her a private room, a courtesy granted because the police had labeled her a high-risk suspect. The irony nearly choked her. An officer stood outside her door, not to protect her, but to guard her. She was the victim, yet they treated her like a prisoner. She knew how the system worked. They protected each other. Anyone left outside was the enemy. Shortly after the shooting, two men in ill-fitting suits entered her hospital room. They introduced themselves as Detectives Pierce Lang and Marco Silva from Internal Affairs. Lang was the talker, a man in his 30s with a receding hairline and a cynical smile that never reached his eyes. Silva stayed silent, a solid observer by the door, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Miss Monroe, Long began, pulling a chair to her bedside without asking. He showed no concern for her injury, asked nothing about how she felt. He opened a notebook. "We're here to hear your version of events from this morning." The phrasing was deliberate. Your version implied other, more credible versions existed. It cast her as a partial party in her own assault. Celeste kept her expression neutral, the training of years in the FBI taking over. She was no longer only the victim. She was an investigator watching a flawed process. "My version is very simple, Detective," she said, voice steady despite the sharp pain in her leg. "I was stopped for allegedly speeding. Officer Whitaker asked for my license and vehicle documentation. I gave him the paperwork and informed him my license was in my wallet inside my bag. I asked permission to retrieve it, and he granted it. While I was taking the wallet from the bag, he shouted, 'Gun!' and shot me." Long scribbled notes, the pen scratching loudly in the quiet room. "According to Officer Whitaker's statement, you verbally refused to comply and show your hands." "That's a lie," Celeste said flatly. "He says you made a sudden movement toward your waist." "Another lie. My hands were in plain view until, with his permission, I reached into the bag." "He says he saw a dark metallic object in your hand that flashed in the sun." Celeste almost laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "He saw my wallet, Detective. It's dark brown leather. The only metal was the zipper, or perhaps the gold badge inside it." For the first time, Lang looked up. A flicker of something, annoyance, interest, crossed his eyes. "Badge?" "My FBI credentials. Special Agent Celeste Monroe." She lowered her voice, letting the weight of the title settle. "I was trying to present my driver's license and my credentials out of professional courtesy when your officer shot me." A brief silence. Silva shifted by the door. Lang's cynical smile tightened. He was not impressed. He was suspicious. "You're claiming to be an FBI agent?" he asked, voice dripping with disdain. "How convenient. I'm sure you have proof." "The proof is in the wallet your officer kicked under my car," Celeste answered, patience fraying, "along with my blood that's currently all over the crime scene he contaminated." Long leaned back with a self-satisfied smile. He had heard it all before. People pretending to be lawyers, doctors, politicians, anything to get out of trouble. To him, an FBI agent was just another line in a familiar script. "Look, Miss Monroe, we have the sworn statement of an officer with years of service, corroborated by his partner. Both state that you were belligerent, and that Officer Whitaker perceived a deadly threat. His actions, based on the information available to him at the time, appear justified." Appear justified. The phrase was a shield, a conclusion already written. They were not investigating what happened. They were investigating how to close the case, so the officer walked away clean. "So the truth doesn't interest you?" Celeste asked, making it clear it was not a question. "We're interested in the facts," Lang replied smoothly. "And the facts are that Officer Whitaker believed his life was in danger. In this job, we don't have the luxury of waiting to see if the gun is real. He did what he was trained to do." The condescension, the contempt, the open prejudice of it all was suffocating. They spoke of her as if she were not in the room. She was no longer a person. She was an obstacle in the narrative, a problem to be managed. They had their version. A brave officer and a threatening suspect, and they were not going to change it. They looked at her, a successful black woman in an expensive car, now claiming to be a federal agent, and it did not fit. It was easier, simpler to believe Whitaker's story. It matched their view of the world. "Detectives," Celeste said, her voice now as cold as ice. "You already have my statement. I suggest you locate my credentials. And I strongly recommend that your department issue a preservation order for all audio and video evidence related to this stop, including the complete, unedited body camera recordings of Officers Whitaker and Vargas." Long stood and snapped his notebook shut. The interview was over. "We'll take that under advisement. Thank you for your time, Miss Monroe. We'll be in touch. As they left the room, Celeste heard Lang murmur to Silva in the hallway, FBI agent. Yeah, right. And I'm the King of England. She's just another one trying to work the system. Celeste closed her eyes. They believed what they said. They always had. But the system she belonged to was older, more powerful, and infinitely more thorough. They thought this was their game, their rules. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The Internal Affairs interview room was designed to be sterile and intimidating. Gray walls, a single steel table, 2 uncomfortable chairs, a one-way mirror. For Officer Grant Whitaker. It felt like home. He had been in that room before, several times for minor complaints, all dismissed. He knew how the system worked. He sat across from Detective Lang, radiating the air of a weary professional. He was the victim, the man who had to live with a split-second decision that had saved his life. Walk me through it one more time, Lang said in a soft, reassuring tone. This was not an interrogation. It was a formality, a procedure to lock in the official version. Whitaker drew a deep breath, a calculated gesture of a man still shaken by having stared death in the face. It was a routine stop, black Mercedes S-Class going a little over the limit. Nothing unusual. But the second the window came down, I felt something was off. The attitude. You know the look. Long nodded with understanding. He knew that look. It was the look of anyone who did not show what he considered the proper deference. She was hostile right away, Whitaker continued, voice steady, eyes fixed on a point on the wall. He was a good liar because he believed his own inventions. He had rewritten the memory to fit his version. I asked for her license, and she started giving me attitude. I had to ask 3 times. I was already feeling very threatened. My training teaches us to read those signals. Verbal non-compliance is a major indicator of possible aggression. He paused, letting the official jargon sink in. Finally, she said it was in her bag, but the way she moved wasn't natural. It was a nervous, jerky movement. She was trying to hide her hands. I ordered her to move slowly, but she ignored me. This was a new detail, another layer of paint on the lie. Celeste had moved with complete calm, but in this room, Whitaker's word was law. She reaches into this bag, and I'm watching her closely. I can't see what she's doing, but my is screaming. Then her hand comes out holding a dark object. She starts turning toward me, raising it, and the sun hits it full on. I see a metallic flash. At that moment, given her hostility, her refusal to follow orders, her restless movements, and the object in her hand that I perceived as a firearm, I had no choice. I acted to neutralize the threat. He fell silent. His performance was finished. He had checked every box, used every key phrase Internal Affairs looked for in a justified shooting. Perceived threat, furtive movement, non-compliance, fear for his life. It was a story designed to be airtight. And Officer Vargas? Long asked. He saw everything. He'll tell you the same. He was just as shaken. He saw her aggressive posture, heard her tone. And the body camera? Long asked, almost as an afterthought. Whitaker shook his head with feigned regret. It's a nightmare. I activated it when I stopped the vehicle, but the unit's been glitching. The recording seems to have cut out right before the main incident. You see the stop, then nothing until after the shot. We've been complaining about these old models for months. It was a perfect excuse, impossible to verify. Departments were always underfunded. Equipment always failed. It was the most believable part of his story. Detective Lang closed his notebook. All right, Grant. Clear, consistent statement. Matches the preliminary report and Officer Vargas's account. You were put in an untenable situation, and you reacted according to your training. I don't see a problem. Whitaker relaxed with a small sigh of relief. The system worked. The thin blue line held firm. Thanks, Pierce. You know how it is out there. Hesitate for a second, and you're dead. I know, Grant. Go home to your family. We'll handle the paperwork. The chief will probably put you on admin for a few weeks while things cool down. Standard procedure. You'll be back on the street before you know it." Walking out of the interview room, Whitaker felt a wave of triumph. He had survived a threat, and now he had survived the bureaucracy. He had won. He thought of the woman in the hospital. She would probably sue. They always did. The city would settle for some insignificant amount out of taxpayer money, not his. She had tried to scare them by claiming to be an FBI agent, but no one believed her. He controlled the narrative. That night, the local news ran a brief report. An officer had been forced to fire his weapon after a suspect allegedly attempted to pull a gun during a traffic stop. The officer was uninjured. The suspect was listed as stable. The department stated that the officer's actions appeared to be within protocol. The official version was locked in, clear, simple, and completely free. Blame. Grant Whitaker slept peacefully that night, certain the incident was behind him. I had no idea that hundreds of miles away in Washington, D.C., his name sat at the top of a priority memorandum on the desk of the FBI's deputy director. The system he trusted was about to be eclipsed by a system he could not even comprehend. The story had not ended. It had not even truly begun. The intravenous morphine barely dulled the sharp pain in Celeste's thigh, and it did even less for the storm in her mind. She lay in the sterile silence of the hospital room, the officer outside her door a constant, irritating reminder of her status as a suspect. The internal affairs detectives had come and gone with their minds already made up and their report already drafted in their heads. They had heard her say she was an FBI agent and dismissed it as the desperate lie of a common criminal. Their arrogance was staggering. They believed they had absolute control. Celeste knew she could not fight this from inside. The local system was a closed circle designed to investigate itself and declare itself innocent. Hiring a lawyer would be the civil response, leading to a long, grinding lawsuit that might someday produce a financial settlement. But this was not about money. This was an assault on a federal agent. This was a fundamental corruption that could not be fixed with a simple check. This required a different response. It required a force that operated outside the local power structure, a force for which local police departments, in the larger scheme, were little more than a minor inconvenience. She looked at her belongings, which a nurse had left on the nightstand. Her bag was there, but her phone and wallet were gone, confiscated as evidence. Yet on the hospital wall hung an old beige landline telephone, the kind most people no longer remembered existed. Carefully, painfully, she swung her legs out of bed. Every movement sent fresh fire through her thigh. Gritting her teeth, she pushed the wheeled IV stand and crossed the few meters to the wall. She lifted the receiver. There was a dial tone. She did not need a contact list. Some numbers a person never forgets. She dialed the private direct line of a secure office in the J. Edgar Hoover building in Washington, a number given to her on her first day as a supervisory special agent, reserved for life or death emergencies. This case met the criteria. It rang twice. A firm, serious voice answered. "Reeves." "It's Celeste Monroe." A beat of surprised silence on the other end. Deputy Director Harlan Reeves headed the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division. He was her mentor, the man who had guided her career for years. He was also one of the most powerful men in American law enforcement. "Celeste, what's wrong? Why are you calling this number?" Concern edged his voice. "I'm in a hospital in Crestwood Hills, Harlan," she said, voice low and steady. "I've been shot." "What? Who? Are you all right? What happened?" The questions came rapid fire. "A local police officer shot me during a traffic stop. His name is Grant Whitaker. I'm stable." The bullet went through my thigh. Reeves was silent for a long moment, absorbing the information. The implications were immediate and severe. A local officer shot you. He stopped me for going a little over the limit in my new neighborhood. He became aggressive immediately. When I reached for my wallet to show identification, he shot me. He and his partner are now telling Internal Affairs that I was aggressive and tried to pull a weapon. A weapon, Reeves repeated, voice cold and expressionless. Celeste, did they know who you were? I was trying to tell him when he pulled the trigger. I've been here. They didn't believe me when I told them who I was. They have me listed as a suspect. They're building a case to justify the shooting. The fury on the other end of the line was palpable even through the phone. It was not loud or explosive. It was a cold, precise rage. Harlan Reeves was a man who understood power, and he understood that what had just happened was an intolerable violation, an attack on one of his own, an attack on the Bureau itself. "Where exactly are you?" he asked, voice now entirely professional. She gave him the hospital name and the city. She could hear rapid keyboard clicks in the background. "All right, Celeste, listen to me. Do not speak to anyone else from that department. Not a detective, not a supervisor, not the chief. Not another word. You are now a federal witness in a federal investigation. There's a guard on my door. He's about to have a very bad day," Reeves said grimly. "I'm sending the nearest hostage rescue team to secure you. They'll be there in under an hour. I'm also sending the best inspection team from the nearest field office. They will take every piece of evidence, your car, the crime scene, every document that department has generated. This is now a federal case under Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code, deprivation of rights under color of law. The local investigation is over." Celeste felt a relief so profound it nearly made her dizzy. Help was coming. "Harlan," she said, thinking of something more. "Body cameras." "Already on it," he answered instantly. "I'm getting a federal warrant signed by a judge as we speak. We'll seize their servers if we have to. They will not be able to hide or delete a single frame. Stay put, Agent Monroe. The FBI is coming." Han hung up. Celeste slowly replaced the receiver and limped back to her bed. The pain in her legs suddenly seemed distant and insignificant. She looked at the young officer standing guard outside her door, bored, distracted. He had no idea that a storm was about to break over his department, a storm summoned from the highest levels of federal power. He and his colleagues believed they were in control. They believed they had a fully accepted version of events. But Celeste had just swung a hammer whose existence they did not even know, and their entire world was about to shatter. Chief Elias Thornton was enjoying a quiet lunch at his favorite Italian restaurant when his cell phone vibrated with an urgent call. It was Sergeant Voss, voice tight with confusion and panic. "Chief, you need to get back to the station right now." "What is it? Can't it wait? I just sat down," Thornton grumbled. "No, sir, it can't. The FBI is here, and I don't mean 1 or 2 agents. It looks like an invasion." Thornton reached the Crestwood Hills police station in minutes. The scene in the parking lot was something he had only seen in movies. Half a dozen black SUVs with official plates and tinted windows sat in a neat, imposing row. Men and women in dark blue tactical vests with yellow FBI lettering moved with silent, disciplined purpose. They were not asking permission. They were acting with absolute authority. One team was cordoning off Whitaker's and Vargas's patrol cars with federal police tape. Another group was entering the station, led by a tall, impeccably dressed man who radiated supreme authority. Thornton intercepted him at the door. "I'm Chief of Police Thornton. Who's in charge here? What the hell is going on?" The man looked at Thornton not as an equal, but as an obstacle. He presented his credentials. "Special Agent in Charge, Quentin Reeves, FBI." As of this moment, this police department and all evidence related to the officer-involved shooting this morning are under federal jurisdiction. We have a judicial order granting access to all files, audio recordings, video, and personnel records of Officers Grant Whitaker and Julian Vargas. He handed Thornton a thick official document. The chief's face went pale as he read the seal of the federal court. "This isn't a request, a federal order over a firearms incident. That's our jurisdiction." Thornton stammered, feeling his authority evaporate before his eyes. "Not anymore," Reeves said in a gravelly voice. "When the victim of the assault is a federal agent, jurisdiction changes. You can cooperate with our investigation, or you can be charged with obstruction of federal justice. The choice is yours, but I suggest you make it quickly." Inside the station, chaos reigned. Quiet, controlled chaos. FBI agents calmly but firmly took over. 2 agents were in the evidence locker, seizing Whitaker's service weapon and every item collected from the scene, including Celeste's wallet and phone. Another team, accompanied by a forensic technician, was in the IT department cloning the hard drives of the station's servers. The local computer tech could only watch, mouth open, as they bypassed his authority with ease. Detective Lang, the arrogant internal affairs investigator, burst out of his office. "What is this? You can't just walk in here and take our files." Agent Reeves looked at him coldly. "You're Detective Lang, the lead investigator on this case." "Yes," Long said, puffing out his chest. "You're relieved," Reeves stated. "Turn over all your notes and the preliminary report." Long looked to Chief Thornton for support, but the chief only shrugged in helpless defeat. The local food chain had just been swallowed by a much larger predator. Defeated, Lang gathered his thin file and handed it over. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the officer guarding Celeste's door was suddenly confronted by 4 men in full tactical gear, weapons at the ready. "We're taking custody of the federal witness," the team leader said in a voice that allowed no argument. The local officer fumbled for his radio, but it no longer mattered. Members of the hostage rescue team took positions outside Celeste's door, a clear, unmistakable declaration of who protected her now. Back at the station, Grant Whitaker was called to the chief's office. He walked in with his usual arrogance, but it evaporated the moment he saw the 2 stern-faced FBI agents standing beside Chief Thornton. "Whitaker," the chief said, voice tight, "these are FBI agents. They're taking over the shooting investigation." Whitaker's blood ran cold. "The FBI? Why?" "The woman you shot," Agent Reeves said flatly, "is Special Agent Celeste Monroe. She's one of ours." Whitaker went pale. The name, the title, everything was real. The convenient lie he had dismissed, the story he and Lang had laughed about, was the truth. The entire fortress of lies he had built suddenly stood on foundations of sand, and a tidal wave was about to wash it away. "She never said anything," he stammered, mind racing for an answer. "According to her statement, you never gave her the chance," Reeves replied. "We have your preliminary report. We have your partner. We're going to find out exactly what happened this morning. You are suspended without pay, effective immediately. Do not leave the city. We will contact you to schedule your formal interview." Whitaker was dismissed. He staggered out of the office. The other officers in the station, who only hours earlier had congratulated him, now avoided his eyes. He was no longer the hero officer who had survived a shooting. He was a liability. How was a pariah? The blue wall that had seemed so impenetrable was beginning to crack, and he was on the wrong side of it. As the FBI agents continued their systematic takeover of the station, Whitaker stood in the parking lot watching them load evidence bags into their SUVs. They were taking everything, his story, his badge, his career, all of it confiscated as evidence against him. The sun was beginning to set, and for the first time that day, Grant Whitaker felt genuine, terrifying fear. The game had changed. He was no longer a player. He was the prey. The FBI forensic laboratory was a world apart from the dusty, underfunded evidence room of the Crestwood Hills Police Department. It was a temple of science, a place where lies died under the cold, brilliant light of microscopic analysis and digital reconstruction. Over the following period, the evidence from the shooting of Special Agent Celeste Monroe was subjected to a level of scrutiny Whitaker and his department could never have imagined. Her black Mercedes was the first witness. A forensic team mapped the bullet trajectory. It showed a downward angle consistent with a standing shooter and a seated or falling victim, directly contradicting Whitaker's claim that she had been pointing a weapon at him. They swabbed the interior of her bag. No gunshot residue. They examined her clothing. The blood spatter pattern confirmed she had been turned away from Whitaker, not facing him, when the bullet struck. Every physical piece of evidence was a silent testimony against him. Yet, the most damning physical evidence came from Celeste's wallet. They found it exactly where the crime scene photos showed it, under the car. Inside, beside her license, was her FBI badge. But there was something else. A tiny smear of rubber on the dark brown leather. Analysis proved it identical to the sole of Officer Grant Whitaker's standard-issue tactical boot. He had not merely found the wallet. He had kicked it, exactly as Celeste had said. He had actively hidden exculpatory evidence. That alone was a federal crime. But the heart of the investigation unfolded in a darkened digital forensics lab. The IT team had cloned the police department's servers, and a specialist named Agent Mei Lin had one assignment: recover the body camera recordings. Whitaker had claimed his camera failed. Vargas's camera had supposedly been pointed at the ground during the critical moments. Local internal affairs had accepted it without question. The FBI did not. Line knew these body camera systems were designed with safeguards. Even if a recording was stopped or a unit damaged, data was often temporarily stored in internal memory or automatically uploaded to a cloud server in short intervals. Whitaker's technical failure lie was amateur. He stopped the recording manually, Lynn explained to Agent Reeves, pointing to a line of code on her screen. The button was pressed exactly 3 seconds after he initiated the stop. That is not a technical failure. That is a deliberate act. He was trying to create a gap. But can you recover what was in that gap? Reeves asked. Line smiled. These systems have a 30-second pre-record buffer. The camera records continuously, and when you hit the button, it saves the previous 30 seconds of video and audio. He stopped the main recording, but the buffer was still active. He thought he was being clever. He wasn't. She typed a few more commands. A previously hidden video file marked as damaged began to load. And as for Officer Vargas's camera, she continued, he may have pointed it at the ground, but the microphone worked perfectly. The first file that played was Vargas's camera, audio only. Whitaker's aggressive voice, Celeste's calm, polite responses. There was no belligerence, no insults. The audio directly contradicted Whitaker's sworn statement. Then, Lynn played the main evidence, the recovered footage from Whitaker's camera. The 30-second buffer allowed the recording to begin just as Celeste reached for her bag. The video was crisp, the audio flawless. It showed Celeste turning with slow, harmless movements, her hand emerging from the bag holding the dark brown leather wallet. No flash, no weapon. She began to turn toward Whitaker, mouth slightly open, perhaps about to say, "Here it is." And then Whitaker, without warning, screamed, "Gun," and fired. The camera captured everything. The brutal violence of the act, Celeste's cry of pure shock and agony, Whitaker's self-serving curses. It even captured the moment he kicked the wallet under the car. Agent Reeves watched the footage in silence, face impassive. This was not merely evidence of a shooting. It was the recording of a serious crime, proof of assault, of perjury, of conspiracy to obstruct justice. Whitaker had not simply invented a story of lies. He had built it on a foundation the FBI had just excavated and exposed. "Make multiple copies," Reeves said in a firm but quiet voice. "Store them on separate servers. I want one copy ready on a tablet. Officer Whitaker's formal interview is scheduled for the morning. I think it's time he saw his own performance." Reeves left the lab carrying a drive that held the absolute truth of what had happened on that sunny suburban street. Grant Whitaker would walk into an interview room the next morning, believing his lies would protect him. He had no idea he was walking into a screening room where he himself was the star of a horror film he had directed. The unblinking eye of the camera had seen everything, and it was about to become his judge, jury, and executioner. The FBI interview room was a considerable upgrade from the local station's version. The lighting was softer, the chairs more comfortable, and the coffee they offered surprisingly good. Everything was intentional. The goal was to put the subject at ease, to create a false sense of security before springing the trap. Grant Whitaker needed no help. He entered with a confidence bordering on arrogance. His attorney, a union lawyer named Fletcher, followed closely. Whitaker had convinced himself that the FBI's involvement was merely a power play, a procedural formality, because the woman happened to be a federal employee who pushed paper. He believed the fundamental facts, as he had presented them, were irrefutable. He had his version. Vargas had corroborated it. It was his word, the word of a decorated street officer, against hers. In his world, that was still a winning hand. Special Agent Quentin Reeves and Agent Maylin, the woman who had recovered the video, sat across the table. Their demeanor was calm, professional, almost placid. "Thank you for coming in, Officer Whitaker," Reeves began. "We just need to clarify a few points from your preliminary statement for our report." "Happy to help," Whitaker said with a slight smile. "Anything to clear this up so I can get back to work." His attorney nodded. "My client is here voluntarily and is fully cooperating with your investigation." Reeves slid a copy of Whitaker's sworn statement across the table. "This is the version you gave your Internal Affairs Division. Have you had a chance to review it? Does it accurately and completely describe the facts as you remember them?" Whitaker glanced at it. He knew it by heart. He had rehearsed it mentally hundreds of times. "Correct. It's all there." "Good," Reeves said, leaning slightly forward. "Let's talk about the suspect's behavior. You described her as immediately hostile and verbally abusive. Can you give us a specific example of something she said?" Whitaker did not hesitate. "It wasn't just one thing. It was the tone, the attitude. When I asked for her license, she said something like, 'Is there a problem, officer?' with heavy sarcasm. She was defiant from the start, very resentful." "And you considered that defiant attitude an indicator of potential physical violence?" Agent Lin asked in a neutral voice. "Absolutely," Whitaker answered, warming to the subject. "In my experience, that attitude is a huge red flag. It's a challenge to authority. You learn it on the street. That's how it starts. First the mouth, then the hands." Reeves made a note. "And you stated you had to ask for her license 3 times. "At least. She was stalling, trying to buy time. I had to raise my voice to get her to produce it." "Let's move to the moment she reached for her bag," Reeves continued without changing tone. "You described her movement as nervous and abrupt. You said she ignored your orders to move slowly." "That's right," Whitaker confirmed, growing more confident with every lie. "She turned her body away from me, like she was trying to hide what she was doing. I told her, 'Let me see your hands,' but she kept going. Classic deception tactic." "And then," Reeves continued, "you saw a metallic flash when she pulled an object from her bag. A dark metallic object. The sun hit it. I perceived it as a firearm. I've seen hundreds of guns in my career. I thought immediately it was a weapon." "No doubt." Attorney Fletcher interjected. "That's the legal standard, agents, the officer's reasonable perception of a threat at the moment. What it turns out to be afterward is irrelevant. His perception is key." Reeves nodded slowly, letting the attorney expand. "I understand the standard protocol. So, Officer Whitaker, just so the record is perfectly clear, you are stating under oath for the purposes of this federal investigation that Agent Monroe was verbally hostile, refused to obey orders, and made a threatening, provocative movement with an object you perceived as a weapon." "Without a doubt," Whitaker said, leaning back in his chair with an expression of satisfaction. He had nailed it. He had presented a textbook case of justified use of force. "Thank you, officer. You've been very clear," Reeves said. He reached beside his chair and produced a tablet, placing it in the center of the table. "We just have one more witness." Whitaker frowned. "A witness? There were no other witnesses." "Yes, there was one," Agent Lin said quietly, but with a sudden presence in her voice. "A witness with a perfect, impartial memory. A witness who saw and heard everything exactly as it happened." She tapped the screen. The video began to play. The screen showed the view from Whitaker's chest. The audio activated, and the first sound was Whitaker's own voice, crystal clear, speaking to Celeste Monroe. But it was not the voice of a calm professional. It was aggressive, dismissive, and Celeste Monroe's voice when she answered was the opposite of hostile. It was polite, controlled. Whitaker stared at the screen. His confident smile faded into a mask of stunned disbelief. "What is this?" he whispered. "This," Reeves said, lowering his voice to an icy register, "is the recording from your body camera. The recording you swore had failed. You have just committed perjury, Officer Whitaker, and we have recorded every word." Whitaker's face went white. The video continued playing, an accusation in high definition. His entire world, built on carefully constructed lies, was collapsing before his eyes. The trap had sprung. Silence filled the interview room, broken only by the audio from the tablet. For Grant Whitaker, it was like watching a ghost. It was his own point of view, his own voice, but it told a story terribly different from the one he had just narrated. On the screen, he watched himself approach the Mercedes. He heard his own curt, disrespectful greeting. License and documentation," his voice barked. "Good morning, officer. Is there a problem?" Celeste Monroe's voice was the embodiment of calm. No sarcasm, no hostility. The first brick in his wall of lies crumbled. His attorney, Fletcher, leaned forward, pale as death. "Where did you get this?" "We recovered it from your department's servers," Agent Lin answered without taking her eyes off Whitaker. "It's amazing what you can find when you actually look." The video continued. "As for my license," Celeste said on the recording, "it's in my wallet, in my bag on the passenger seat. May I get it?" A polite request that directly contradicted his sworn testimony that she had refused to obey. "Get it," Whitaker snapped on the video. The second brick turned to dust. Whitaker's breathing grew shallow. Sweat slid down his back. He was no longer a confident police officer. He was a cornered animal. He watched the camera tilt downward, showing Celeste's hand searching her bag. The movement was not abrupt or nervous. It was smooth, precise. Then came the critical moment. Her hand emerged holding the dark brown leather wallet. It was, beyond any doubt, a wallet. No dark metallic object. No flash of sunlight on a gun barrel. Only a wallet. The third brick disintegrated. The camera showed her beginning to turn, the wallet resting in her open palm. And then he heard his own voice, a raw, ugly sound, screaming the word that was supposed to be his shield. "Gun!" The image on the screen shuddered as the weapon fired. An orange muzzle flash, the sharp crack of the shot. He watched in horror as Celeste Monroe collapsed. A cry of pure shock and agony tore from her lips. "Stop," Whitaker whispered. "Turn it off." "Oh, we're not finished," Reeves said in a voice of pure ice. "The best is still to come." The camera, still recording, focused on Celeste, lying bleeding on the ground. It captured her wide eyes filled with pain. Then it captured something else. Whitaker's boot entering the frame, kicking the wallet. The video showed the wallet sliding across the pavement until it disappeared under the car. The final piece of the puzzle did not merely collapse, it exploded. The video was irrefutable proof. This was not a simple mistake made in the heat of the moment. He had shot an unarmed woman without justification, and then he had actively and deliberately hidden evidence that would have proven her innocence and his guilt. He had committed a serious felony of assault followed by obstruction of justice. Agent Lin paused the video and fixed Whitaker with a hard stare. Officer Whitaker, the FBI forensic laboratory found residue from the rubber of your boots on that wallet. We also recovered the audio from Officer Vargas's microphone, where you can be heard conspiring with him to invent a false story about a suspicious movement and a metallic flash while Agent Monroe lay on the ground bleeding. You told him, and I quote, "They love that one." Attorney Fletcher covered his face with his hands. He knew when a case was lost. This one was not merely lost. It was annihilated. "Grant," the attorney said in a dull, defeated voice, "do not say another word." But Whitaker could not help himself. The bravado, the arrogance, all of it was a facade. Now that the crack had opened, only panic remained. "It was a mistake," he stammered, eyes wild as he looked between Reeves and Lin. "The sun was in my eyes. I was scared. You don't know what it's like out there. You make a decision in a split second. You made a decision the moment you saw a black woman in an expensive car in a neighborhood where you decided she didn't belong." Reeves cut in, voice sharp. "You had already condemned her. The rest was just procedure. The problem for you, officer, is that your camera recorded the truth. You didn't see a threat. You saw a target." Reeves stood. The interview was clearly over. "Grant Whitaker, you are under arrest for aggravated assault, violation of civil rights under color of law, obstruction of justice, and perjury. You have the right to remain silent." As another agent entered to handcuff him, Whitaker stared at the frozen image on the tablet screen, his own boot kicking the evidence of his crime. In that moment, he finally understood. He had never controlled the narrative. He had been a character in a story he did not understand, a story that was always going to end with that single, damning high-definition image. The unblinking eye had seen everything, and now everyone else would see it too. Officer Julian Vargas sat in another interview room, one that felt colder and smaller than the one Whitaker had occupied. They had separated him from his partner the moment the FBI took control, and for the past period, he had been drowning in a potent mixture of fear and resentment. He had replayed the events of the shooting over and over in his mind. His own complicity sat heavy in his stomach. He had followed Grant's lead, backed his version, placed the key pieces in the investigation. He had put loyalty to his partner above loyalty to the truth. Now he was about to learn the price of that decision. Agent Reeves and Agent Lin entered the room. They offered him no coffee. Their expressions were hard, cold. "Officer Vargas," Reeves began, "we've reviewed your statement regarding the shooting of Agent Monroe. We have some questions." Vargas straightened, trying to project a confidence he did not feel. "I'll tell you what I told my department. It happened exactly the way Grant said. The woman was hostile. She made a threatening movement. Grant saw a gun. It was a justified shooting." He recited the lines of the script Whitaker had written for them on the street. Agent Lin placed a tablet on the table, but did not turn it on. "So you are stating for the record, or that you personally witnessed Agent Monroe behaving in a hostile and belligerent manner?" "Yes," Vargas lied, heart hammering. "Her posture was aggressive, and you perceived her movements as threatening," Reeves pressed. "Absolutely. A clear threat. Grant saved his own life, maybe mine too." Reeves leaned forward, voice dangerously soft. "Officer Vargas, you have a decision to make right here and right now. Two paths are in front of you. On the first path, you continue lying for your partner. You cling to a story we both know is a complete fabrication. If you choose that path, I will charge you with conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation, making false statements to a federal agent, and being an accessory to a serious felony assault. You will lose your job, your pension, and you will go to federal prison. Grant Whitaker will not walk free. He will not be there to protect you." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like a death sentence. "Then there is the second path," Reeves continued. "On this path, you tell us the truth, the complete, unvarnished truth of what happened from the moment Whitaker initiated that traffic stop. You tell us about the conversation you had after the shooting, the one in which you and he conspired to invent a story. If you choose that path, you may still lose your job, but you will have the full cooperation of the federal prosecutors regarding sentencing. You might even avoid prison. That is the only deal you will be offered, and you must decide now. Vargas's face went pale. He looked from Reeves to Lynn, searching for any sign of weakness. He found none. They had him. He did not know how, but he knew it with absolute certainty. "I stand by my statement," he said in a trembling voice. It was a final, desperate act of loyalty, or perhaps only fear. Reeves sighed with deep disappointment. What a shame. He nodded to Agent Lynn. She tapped the tablet screen. It was the video from Whitaker's camera. Vargas watched in silence, horrified, as the entire brutal sequence unfolded. He saw Celeste's courtesy. He saw Whitaker's aggression. He saw the wallet, not a gun. He saw the shot. Then, Lynn switched to another file. It was an audio track synchronized with the video, the recording from his own microphone. He heard his own voice, clear as water. "Grant, what the hell happened?" "She went for a gun," Whitaker's voice lied. Then came the most incriminating part, the conspiracy. "Let's say it was a dark metallic object," Whitaker's voice said. "The sun was in my eyes. It flashed. She made a sudden furtive movement. Use those words. Furtive movement. They love that one." Then his own voice, the single word of approval that sealed his fate. "All right." The audio continued, recording every detail of their plan to lie. The sound of his own complicity filled the small room, choking him. When the recording ended, Vargas was shaking, face covered in sweat. The blue wall had not merely cracked, it had been demolished by an avalanche of digital evidence. "Son of a bitch," Vargas whispered, though it was unclear whether he was addressing Reeves or Grant Whitaker. He had tied his fate to a sinking ship, and now the anchor was dragging him into the abyss. "Path number 1, Officer Vargas, or path number 2? Reeves asked again in a monotone. There was no longer a choice. Loyalty, brotherhood, the code of silence, all of it meant nothing in the face of irrefutable evidence. It was simply a matter of survival. "Second path," Vargas said in a broken voice. "I'll tell you everything." Over the next 2 hours, Julian Vargas confessed. He detailed not only the lies about the shooting, but years of Grant Whitaker's conduct, the everyday racism, the aggressive stops, the reckless tactics. He became the government's star witness. He gave the federal prosecutors everything they needed, not only to convict Grant Whitaker, but to portray a man who was a flagrant violator of civil rights, a predator with a badge. When he finally signed his statement, Julian Vargas felt a profound emptiness. He might have avoided prison, but he had betrayed the only code he knew. Walking out of the room, he knew his career was finished. The blue wall was a myth. When the pressure was highest, every man looked out for himself, and he had just handed his partner to the wolves to save himself. The federal courtroom was packed. The case of United States versus Grant Whitaker had become a media phenomenon. It was not merely a police shooting. It was a system forced to confront its own failures. Grant Whitaker, a broken man, sat at the defense table. He was no longer the arrogant officer of before. He was a pale, gaunt figure in a suit too large for him, staring at a future measured in years behind bars. He had pleaded guilty, his only hope of a reduced sentence. Now, at the sentencing hearing, he had to face the woman whose life he had nearly destroyed. Celeste Monroe approached the podium to deliver her victim impact statement. She wore neither a hospital gown nor the blood-stained clothes of a victim. She wore the impeccable Navy suit of a veteran FBI agent. She moved with a slight limp, the only visible remnant of the shooting, a scar that would stay with her for the rest of her life. But she stood tall, her voice clear and steady, radiating an authority that had nothing to do with her badge and everything to do with her character. "Your Honor," she began, addressing the judge but locking her gaze on Grant Whitaker. On that morning, Grant Whitaker did not see a citizen. He did not see a professional woman on her way to work. He did not even see a human being. He looked at me and saw a collection of his own prejudices. He saw a black woman, a luxury car, and an affluent neighborhood. And in his mind, that combination was a crime. He had already judged and sentenced me before I ever spoke a word. Whitaker flinched, avoiding her eyes. He has claimed through his attorneys that it was a tragic mistake, a decision made in an instant out of fear for his life. Celeste continued, raising her voice with controlled passion. That is the final lie in a long chain of lies. There was no fear in his eyes that day. There was contempt. There was no mistake. It was a choice. He chose aggression. He chose not to listen. He chose to see a weapon where there was only a wallet. And when he realized his error, he did not choose to render aid or seek the truth. He chose to kick the evidence of his crime under my car, and then he chose to construct an elaborate story to justify his actions. The courtroom sat in absolute silence, hanging on every word. This case, Your Honor, goes beyond a single bullet. It is about a man who was given a badge and a gun, and who used them not to protect and serve, but to harass and intimidate. The investigation into the shooting against me has revealed a pattern. 17 formal complaints were filed against Grant Whitaker during his years on the force. 17 citizens tried to report his abuse, his racism, and his excessive use of force. And in all 17 cases, his department investigated itself and determined that his actions were unfounded or within policy. She paused, letting the weight of that number settle over the room. Those 17 people did not have the protection of a body camera that recorded the raw truth. They did not have the intervention of the FBI to demand justice. They had no voice. Their truth was dismissed, and Grant Whitaker was allowed to continue his reign of terror that culminated the day he shot me. Today, I do not speak only for myself. I speak for the grandmother he humiliated during a traffic stop. I speak for the teenager he illegally searched. I speak for every person of color who was stopped in Crestwood Hills for the crime of driving while black in a car he decided was too good for them. She stepped closer to the podium, eyes fixed on Whitaker. Grant Whitaker is a symptom of a disease of intolerance and impunity that infects certain corners of law enforcement, a disease that is cured only by the harsh light of truth. The evidence in this case, the video, the audio, the forensics, was that light. It burned away the lies and exposed the ugliness underneath. He took from me the sense of safety I felt in my own community. He left me with a scar that will ache on cold days for the rest of my life. But he will not take my voice. And today, that voice joins the chorus of those 17 others and countless more who were too afraid to speak, demanding justice. She turned to the judge. He did not merely assault me, Your Honor. He assaulted the principles he swore to defend. He betrayed his badge, his community, and the fundamental promise of equality under the law. I ask you to sentence him not only for the injury he caused to my leg, but for the damage he has done to public trust through more than a decade of abuse. Thank you. Celeste returned to her seat, having fulfilled her duty. The prosecutor rose and addressed the judge. Your Honor, pursuant to the plea agreement, the government recommends a sentence of 4 years in federal prison, the maximum under the guidelines, and restitution of $22,000 for medical expenses. Mr. Whitaker has waived his right to appeal. The judge looked at Grant Whitaker with deep disgust. Mr. Whitaker, you are a disgrace to your uniform. You have damaged the relationship between police and community more than any protest or riot. I accept the government's recommendation. You are sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. The gavel fell, and the sound echoed like the gunshot that had started it all. For Grant Whitaker, the story was over. For Celeste Monroe and the system she represented, the work had only just begun. Some time later, Celeste Monroe stood before a class of new recruits at the FBI Academy. Her limp was almost imperceptible, more a memory than a physical limitation. She moved across the stage, her presence commanding, and her story had become a fundamental part of the new curriculum she herself had helped design. "Power is a trust," she told the young agents. "The moment you believe it is a right, you have already begun to fail. The moment you see a person as a stereotype instead of a citizen, you have betrayed your oath." Grant Whitaker was now inmate number 7T83 in a federal correctional institution. His fall from grace had been swift and total. He lost his job, his pension, and his freedom. The union that had promised to protect him abandoned him the moment the video became public. His partner, Julian Vargas, had been fired and accepted a deal with the prosecutors for his role in the cover-up, receiving 2 years of probation in exchange for his testimony. He now worked as a night security guard at a warehouse, the ghost of his police career following him at every step. The impact of Celeste's case had radically transformed the Crestwood Hills Police Department. Chief Thornton was forced into early retirement. The department was placed under a federal consent decree, a comprehensive reform mandate overseen by the Department of Justice. The FBI investigation into Whitaker had uncovered a culture of zero tolerance for misconduct. As a result, new policies were implemented. The old, unreliable body cameras were replaced with a state-of-the-art system that automatically uploaded to the cloud, tamper-proof. A civilian oversight board with real power was created. The 17 unfounded complaints against Whitaker were reopened, resulting in significant settlements paid directly from the police department's budget. The case became a national benchmark. The body camera footage aired on every news broadcast, a brutal, undeniable lesson in how prejudice can lead to violence. It became a training tool for police forces across the country, a case study not of what to do, but of what an officer must never become. Celeste's victim impact statement was published in newspapers and studied in law schools, a powerful expression of both the promise and the peril of American justice. The scar on her thigh remained a constant reminder, not of victimhood, but of purpose. She had been given a unique and painful opportunity to observe the system's failures from the inside. Instead of returning to her previous post, she accepted a new position at FBI headquarters, leading a national task force dedicated to investigating civil rights violations by law enforcement agencies. She used her experience to build bridges between federal and local authorities, creating programs to improve training, transparency, and accountability. She transformed her personal trauma into a tool for systemic change. The bullet that was meant to end her ultimately only made her stand taller. She had ensured that her pain was not in vain, that the crack in the blue wall became a doorway through which light and redemption could enter. In quiet moments late at night, Celeste sometimes traced the thin silver line of the scar on her leg. It was the map of a painful journey, but also the symbol of a victory. One prejudiced man's single act of violence had set in motion a chain of events that brought down not only him, but the corrupt, complacent system that had protected him. His arrogance was his undoing. He believed he was the law. He learned the hard way that no one is above it. The wound had healed, leaving behind a mark of resilience. It served as a permanent reminder that justice, true justice, is not a passive concept. Sometimes it must be fought for. Sometimes blood must be shed for it. And sometimes the deepest scars are the ones with the power to heal not only one person, but a nation. What did you feel when you pictured the body camera footage? Have you ever witnessed an injustice and felt powerless to stop it? Share your thoughts in the comments and support the channel so we can keep bringing you stories where the truth finally comes to light.